The landscapes of our lives are for learning, where experience is our teacher. When we gather together to share our resources, we are destined to love and thrive. Good morning, Pierre.
Hey, good morning. We're kind of following up on the Rich Roll podcast, where Rich Roll interviews Peter Attia. And what I just wanted to ask what you know about Peter, because you said, hey, we should talk about him.
Yeah, I get his newsletter. It's called The Drive. He has a podcast called The Drive, and I get his newsletter. I think he's a cardiologist.
He's a physician, Stanford University physician. Hold on one second. He has degrees in mechanical engineering and applied mathematics. After medical school, he spent 5 years at Johns Hopkins. Surgical oncology.
Okay. Yeah, cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he knows a lot about cardiology too, because I know that I associate that with him because probably he does talk about, stuff of the heart and also cancer and obesity and longevity. I think he's known mostly for longevity, but what I do know about him with regard to longevity is his most recent book he just published was about not how to live longer, but how to live better longer.
Yeah, no, the thing that came up was lifespan and health span.
Yes. Yes. I also know, and I also know that the little story he tells in his book and that he's been telling on he's been going on a lot of podcasts I listen to, and I've heard him tell this little anecdote about how he had kind of anger and aggression issues, and he calls his self-talk inside his head a Bobby Knight. Do you remember that basketball coach from University of Indiana or Indiana State? I would forget which one.
Indiana, yeah.
But who was a wild man as a coach, completely out of control, throwing chairs around, screaming in his players' faces. And so Peter Attia said that was his inner dialogue, how he talked to himself and berated himself like Bobby Knight.
Yes. And he said in this podcast with Rich Roll, it wasn't just his inner dialogue, it was his outer dialogue. He would verbally, out loud, yell at himself in the most vile terms. And you talk about Bobby Knight throwing the chair, which was the classic thing that comes up with Bobby Knight. He goes into his house and he throws a table. He has a wife and kids.
Yeah.
He throws a dining room table and smashes it after he had smashed a bunch of things.
I would say that's slightly dysregulated.
It's
right.
It's really interesting. It's interesting that it's called the Peter Attia Drive, his podcast and newsletter and everything. His drive was his addiction, essentially. He's the first person that swam from Maui to Lanai and round trip. The first person to do that. And Rich Roll was a swimmer. And I think there's something to swimming and long distance running that you just have to put your head down and do this. And it's
grind.
Yeah, it's so dang repetitive, and it takes a certain kind of personality, and that work ethic gets applied to other things. But
obsessive too. Obsessive, extreme. Like those things are extreme. If you're talking about a spectrum of exercising from 0 to whatever, like that's on the extreme side, right?
Yeah, and both Rich Roll and Peter Attia in this podcast were talking about how they basically covered up their traumas with addictions, which didn't manifest themselves to them because and I've said this myself, because the addiction looks
Like
normalish. It
achievement.
looks normalish. It's giving you your personality. They're successful, they're super successful, and it's the addiction that's fueling that.
Yep.
And it's covering up their ability to be, more human and self-comforting. And, and it leads into some pretty dark territory. The
Yep.
interesting thing in his book, which,
Dark territory psychologically.
excuse me?
Dark, it leads to dark territory. Do you mean psychologically within them?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And also some dark behaviors that, even though the addictive behavior is good,
And it's channeled into good things,
it's
becoming
channeled into
a
good
god.
things, but at the same time, because you're not connected to your inner core, you're not loving yourself, you're medicating yourself. um, you can treat others, uh, you know, not in a way that you would like. And
Well, yeah, because you're not treating yourself almost like with compassion or kindness or love or calm, right? So that
correct,
it leads into
correct.
relationships. Yeah.
Yeah, he throws the table, and and he thinks he's going to just do something else in the house, and his wife, kicks him out, and he stays in a motel for like 3 days. One of the interesting things about this long podcast, and the guy writes a book, um I don't know, tools to optimize your health, prevent disease, and live longer. He has a chapter in there on emotional health, and he writes about his transformation from this driven person who goes into a dark place and has to go to counseling and residential kind of psychological rehab for weeks. One of the interesting things about it was to hear him and Rich Roll both had recovery stories as men, successful men,
Very
as,
smart, capable, lots of resources, men. Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
family men,
Hmm.
ethical men,
Yep.
open up and be vulnerable and share these stories. And I just thought it was amazing.
Yeah. That's a big deal. I think that's, the mental health stigma thing, right? Is like we think a certain kind of person is a kind of person with mental health issues. And, even saying that mental health issues, like his, inability to control that rage or whatever, we can consider that a mental health issue. But, but somehow, like everybody's suffering from something, right? Like you don't have to be sick to be better mentally, physically, right? Like it's not like these are sick people.
Right.
They're highly successful, and so it just goes to show you that like it's not beyond any of us, and we're such a combination of so many things. Like you have lots of resources and you have lots of challenges, and it all looks different because everybody's so different, right? So
Yeah.
you just say like it's kind of profound or like unusual or like refreshing to see two very highly successful, highly intellectual men like talk about the things that plague them and their shortcomings, their challenges, and then you know share that, which is even better, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Um,
because I think sometimes we're surprised when men commit suicide more than women, and I think we're surprised when somebody commits suicide, a man, older man, who's like, oh my god, like had a great family, had a great what, like everything was okay. And it's like, well, it's not so surprising.
Yeah, that's a very good point about suicides and how they happen and how unprepared people are for that reality when it comes, because it's masked in the masculine, context, and there's a lot of suffering that happens underneath and a lot of denial, and then and as he said, Dr. Attia, you know, you just you just feel like you can't, um, get out of it. You've denied it for so long, and then there's a tremendous amount of shame that goes along with it. Anyway, I wanted to talk about one little piece of it, which has been kind of on my mind and on my heart. And we were talking about Coleman Hughes in a previous podcast,
Mhm.
young African American podcaster and philosophy intellectual guy. Conversations with Coleman explores racism and everything, and how regulated he is, and soft in tone and non-reactive. This is a long podcast with Dr. Peter Attia and Rich Roll.
Mhm.
He gets into the emotional, chapter and dialogue and explaining stuff. Now, it's a really super hard thing to talk about.
Mhm.
And he admitted that it was uncomfortable to be actually speaking about it in public. And Rich was encouraging him, and he was freely doing it, knowing he was doing the right thing.
Mhm.
His voice was so disembodied that it was a little freaky. And he's a very intense speaker anyway. But when he went into that conversation, it was interesting. And he related a story where he was trying to comfort his kid after he, scolded him. And the first thing he did is he went into his office for 10 minutes, and he was telling this story as a recovered person, saying that he was doing the right thing. And I was just listening to it going, and then Rich picked up on it, but in such a diplomatic way. It was really, it was
Why?
really.
What was why? What? I don't understand what you mean about him going into his office to
He's,
calm
he,
down.
he scolded the kid. He scolded his youngest child, and there
Yeah.
are some other stories about his family life which were eyebrow raising. Let me just put it that way. When he
Yeah.
was not well, and when I say not well, he was on the top of his game, but the way he treated people. So anyway, he scolds his child, just yells at him, said, "We don't do that." Child ran, go to your room. Child goes in his room. Dad goes to his desk and realizes that he lost it with the kid,
Yeah.
verbally, and works for 10 minutes. And he was saying that part of his recovered behavior is the half-life of making amends. He didn't use the word amends. Rich interjected that, but sort of figuring it out. So within 10 minutes, he figured out that, maybe he should go check on the child, right?
Mhm.
And so he does, and the child won't look at him, and the child is distraught,
Mhm.
in the sense of just like
What just happened? Yeah.
ashamed. He's 5 years old.
Yeah.
And then the comforting words that he used wouldn't have been the words that I used, and they wouldn't have been the words Rich used, because he was essentially talking to himself.
And what was he saying?
It's
What was
kind of saying things like, I don't want to yell at you. I miss, Dad shouldn't do that. Um, you know, I apologize, and not that those words are the wrong words to use in that situation, but, you just had to be there. Rich picked up on it and said, hey, well, yeah, I learned that sometimes when we make amends, we're, actually working on our own stuff rather than focusing our concern on the person that's hurting.
Mhm.
But Dr. Attia says, well, what do you mean? Do you have an example? And it's almost like he was in denial about what, like he just didn't
Or he just
realize,
wasn't aware.
right, wasn't aware. And so then Rich rolled out this, oh, sorry for the pun, this example. And it was, anyway, you
I
know,
honestly, Pierre, I'm just listening to you and I'm thinking about your perception of the conversation. That's why, like, I asked, you were like, you did the whistle thing. You were like, he yelled at his son and then like, and it's like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know what you're thinking about that. So then retelling me in detail,
right,
it's just like, I'm thinking the whole time, that's your perception of the
right.
conversation with all of your parenting as a father and whatever coming to be, you know what I mean? And so
True,
yeah, no,
true.
it's just it's a kind of an aside that I'm just sharing of like, oh, I'm thinking about how you're seeing and listening and interpreting that.
Yeah,
And I wonder if I would have interpreted it the same way. You know what I mean?
was kind of, yeah, no, totally. It's kind of how I started off because we both picked up on Coleman Hughes' demeanor.
Mm,
And then it, and when I picked up on this demeanor,
mm,
it was from him talking one way,
mhm,
then talking a different way. Then they went into um, health issues, and his voice literally changed.
yeah.
It became softer, and he talked faster, and he was just, you could hear why he was just on top of his game. And I'm gonna,
Maybe he's more confident in that realm, right? Is a different role, it's a different part of him. So literally, like we talk about, internal family systems and parts of people, but like the other parts that probably it's almost like maybe the emotional parts are newer for him and he's not as comfortable speaking
to
in
me,
that part of himself, you know what I
to
mean?
me, to me, it
Maybe
was
that's what he
so,
picked up on, right?
to me, it was so clear. It was very, very late at night,
Yeah.
and that I was listening to it and only listening to it, kind of with my eyes closed, wasn't watching, didn't see any affect. I was just picking this all up from his voice, and I was wondering about it. And then when he went into the medical information, and just like, whoa, there's this soft, gentle teaching, emotive voice. I was like, whoa, that is different. Anyway, to wrap this up and
Yeah.
also give the guy some major kudos.
Yeah.
He writes about longevity, and he pulled apart uh, cholesterol information better than anybody that I've listened to, and a few other things that he did on the medical front. The guy really,
He's brilliant.
does his research and knows what's going on. And he's got this book on longevity and how to outlive. That'll tell you something about the guy, how
Mhm.
to how to beat the odds, basically.
Yeah, I like that. I know, just I mean, we kind of went down the rabbit hole with his little emotional chapter in the book, but like really the most and his work is like I know there's like four different parts to that book. One is like
Correct.
cardiology, the other one's cancer, the other one's obesity, maybe the other one's cholesterol, whatever. But yeah, no, he's great with like I like listening to him and learning from him because he's really good about the talking about the limitations of the medical system and what you would get in your lab or from your PCP and like how much doctors like don't know and can't do for you and like other resources you can use to get better testing, look for this kind of testing.
He's
He's
willing to lay it
smart.
out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, he's willing to
And
lay it
he's
out
he's
there. He
also
cuts through a
very
lot of the medical narrative, like and
and the research and the and bullshit research and
oh
like
yeah,
broken research, and then like I think he just came I think the last newsletter that I read was about Ozempic, the weight loss drug, the obesity drug, and like how safe it, they want to roll it out to kids, and like how safe that is, and there's no data to support certain things, and the whole pharmaceutical story of, okay, maybe they're just trying to sell you a drug, and these, you know what I mean, there's a lot more there that people need to know. And I always like trustworthy sources who, are honest and open to, understanding the data, and then really communicating that to the everyday layperson, because people hear, oh, well, research shows that there's studies on it. It's like, well, we got to go one step further. What are the quality of those studies? And this is a guy who's ethical and understands and can say, that's why that study isn't very good. They didn't do X, Y, Z. And yeah, so I
You're
like
so right. You're so right. I mean, he's a really driven guy, really smart, all those things that we talked about. When it's put, and I think you need somebody like that to go up against the system. Not everybody can go up against and do the research and say, this is not the way it goes. The whole LDL and HDL, he explained it all, and he does it, like you said, in layman's terms, so you can understand the actual science.
Yep.
And did it like it was amazing.
Also pushes
one more
exercise
thing about him.
Talks about exercise as the best drug for
Right.
so many things. That's another one of his, I love that he promotes that and shows that, and
Right. He's super
so much powerful than people know.
Super practical guy, writing about longevity and health and whatnot. I might just follow this guy a little bit, because he's going to be, or because the book just came out recently, I think, I don't know when, and Rich interviewed him. He's going to be on Huberman, and he's going to be on Rogan or somebody else.
Yeah,
So
he's
like,
already been. He's already
yeah,
been on all of them. Yeah, that was an old one because he's already been on Huberman, and he had Huberman on the drive, and they've done two. He had laryngitis and they had to reschedule, and yeah.
okay, yeah,
On Joe Rogan too, yeah.
yeah. So I want to.
They all know each other, I think,
I know they're all like, yeah, they're all really hooked up, and they drive, Formula One simulators and
all
crap
their
like.
Navy SEAL friends, and they do bow hunting and all that
Yeah,
shit.
yeah, big archery dudes. Yeah, 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 yeah. Anyway, so that's the dude, and
Peter
he'll
Attia,
be,
Dr.
he'll
Peter
be a
Attia.
resource. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Well, I'm Maureen from Landscapes for Learning. Learn to live with Peter Attia.
Oh, that is so good.
Learn. Keep learning.
Well, I'm Pierre from Yoga Heals on a Roll with Rich Roll. And peace through grace, my friends. Peace through grace. These are terrible things.
Rich Roll does peace and plants.
Yes, he does. Yeah. Peace and plants.